the late, great Phil Lynott, who I met up with just a couple of months before his sad death on January the 4th, 1986. Now, Phil had enjoyed more success 2 years after the split of Thin Lizzy by teaming up once again with former Lizzy guitarist Gary Moore, who he'd fallen out with after Gary had walked out on Thin Lizzy on an American tour some years earlier. But they put their differences behind them and scored a massive hit with the single Out in the Fields.
We met at an airport, and we just made up that. I mean, there was no argument really, talked our way over. We decided then, with us being pals again, I got our office to get onto him and see if he'd play at the Lizzy farewell thing at Hammersmith, because we were recording it, and I thought it'd be a good thing to do. And so he turned up at that, which ended up on the Life album, the farewell thing with all the guitar players. And after that, he was touring Ireland, and they were doing a documentary on him. And they asked me would I come over and play a couple of numbers with him, like Parisian Walkways and a couple of songs like that. So I jumped up and did that, and that went so well. I mean, his management was seeing that and was so impressed with that. They thought that we worked very well together, and they said we should actually record together. Well, Gary had a song that he thought would suit my voice, and asked me to play, to record. And it was out in the fields, and I had a song called Military Man that I was playing, and they liked that. And then we just went in and recorded the two songs, and somebody said, "Do Still in Love with You," and they took one of the live things from, the Belfast concert, and that's about it. It was a single. And the single went on to do really well.
Do you think this thing about you hating each other, was it just bad publicity then in the first place, as say when Gary left him, was it?
There was an element of truth in it. I mean, not hate. Well, obviously we're in the middle of an American tour. I sent out for Midge-Ure, who I was pals with at the time, and Midge-Ure came over and stood in for about 3 or 4 months while we finished off various tours of America, Australia and Japan. The reason it looks so bad, I think, because I'm used to people leaving bands and stuff, but it was A, I thought the way he did it was bad, and B, was that every time then we'd do an interview, people would say, Gary says this, he left because of this, and what do you think of Gary? And I'd go, well, I think this, and this of Gary. And then people would go to Gary and say, well, Philip Lynott said,
Is this just a one-off then, or do you plan to record another single or maybe even an album together?
It started off as a one-off. I mean, obviously we're both aware that if it was successful, our managements would, find time for us to work together again. I'm not adverse to working with him again on projects or on various things, whether it be my solo album or his album or a duo album or singles. I'm not that against it, but I wouldn't, I don't think either of us would work with each other permanently, We had to rehearse for TV shows like the Old Grey Whistle Test asked us to do a couple of tracks live, and we did that ECT live. So we've rehearsed live, and obviously we learned the numbers by rehearsing live. So we could, I wouldn't put it out of the way of me appearing at one of his gigs and say doing a couple of numbers or vice versa, if the single is successful. But as I say, we just went in to record the songs first, and what's happening now is really just, it's really down to who comes up with an idea that's acceptable to the both of us, but the only thing I can definitely say is that we won't be joining to form a band, on a permanent basis.
It's almost 2 years now since Thin Lizzy split up. You then formed Grand Slam along with Lawrence Archer and also Mark Stanway, to name but two. What actually happened there? Because, everything seemed to be going great for you, and then all of a sudden the split. What actually went wrong, if anything?
Well, A, we were finding it difficult to get a record deal, and B, we started to run out of money. There was people interested in giving us record deals, but negotiation, and then we want to hear some more, and then we want to see the band, and da-da-da. And meanwhile, we were doing gigs here, there, and everywhere, and we were just starting to run out of cash. So anyway, everything was okay. I went off to America to do something with Huey Lewis, and when I came back, Mark and Lawrence had left. I read about it in the papers. Nobody rang me and told me that they were leaving.
When you were playing with Grand Slam, when you were playing live, did you find that the fans still expected you to do, old Lizzy stuff, and, did they accept that it was Grand Slam and not Thin Lizzy, or? Yeah,
I think they did. I think the supporters that came up, obviously, a lot of them were ex-Lizzy supporters, that came along, and they were very understanding, the ones that did come along, and I'll be very grateful to them, because it was a very bad period in my life, insofar as personally, my private life was falling apart a bit, so I thought it was important for me to get out on the road and work in a live situation, whether it be smaller gigs or whether, no matter what the music was like, I just wanted to go out and work. Otherwise, I think I would have cracked up in London. So for me, it was beneficial, to be in Grand Slam. I mean, in retrospect, I can see that some of the supporters may have wanted us to be Thin Lizzy Mark II, and we did do a couple of Lizzy songs, but I mean, for me, it was interesting to go down a peg and B, try out new material.
Following the success of the single Out in the Fields and also 19, I was keen to find out what was next for him as far as recording was concerned.
I don't know. I mean, what I'm going to do is a solo album, as opposed to, say, the way I did it with Grand Slam. This time I'm going to get the record deal, which I have, make the album, and then the songs I have, I'm going to try and get, say, with a song like Harlem, for example, I'll just take songs that, well, say that's a funkier, then say 19, which is a rock one. I would look for funk players to record Harlem, and then with 19 I'd look for heavy rock players.
So you're picking individual musicians then, really, for the album?
Yeah, like, for example, Gary, obviously, is going to work on the album. John Sykes, who I've mentioned, he's going to work on the album. Tony Thompson from Powerhouse Station, he's going to work on the album. I was thinking of asking Brian Downey to work on the album. So I'll get the individuals to work on the tracks, and then maybe when I've got the solo album done, then form a band and tour with the album.
So the last two solo albums weren't really along the same vein as Lizzy. They're a lot lighter, if you like. Are you going to put a little bit of everything into the new solo album, or is it just going to be along the same lines as the last two?
No, I think they'll be completely. I think this solo album will be like a solo album. When I did the other two, they were like solo projects, like I was in Thin Lizzy.
As it, you want to get right away from that.
So I couldn't really turn around and do any really hard rock stuff, because the comparisons would have immediately went to, well, I thought it was a good idea not to play songs that were in the same sort of tempo, so with the same aggression that with Lizzy, because I wanted Lizzy to have the choice of them songs. So I always did an alternative sort of style.
So what you were doing there was that, like, Lizzy was the main thing.
As long as I'm in a band, that's the main thing, When they get the choice of any of the material I write, whether it be Thin Lizzy, Grand Slam, whatever band I'm in, they get the choice. But when I was doing a solo project, I just did the alternative ones. This time, it'll be much easier for me just to take what I like doing, whether it be a rock song or a funk song, or whether, whatever.
And when the single Out in the Fields surfaced back in 1985, on the B-side of the 12-inch, remember them, a completely re-recorded version of the Lizzy classic Still in Love with You. Phil explained why.
Gary really wanted to do that, much more so than anything else. And I didn't mind doing it because it is such a nice song. The story that goes behind it is that initially when it first came out, the one with Frankie Miller singing on it, that's Gary playing on it. But we got the record deal with tracks like that, with Phonogram. And so consequently, Brian Robertson had to learn the solo note for note. I mean, even Gary found difficulty recording it this time, trying to play the solo anyway different than the original one. It's all based on that structure. So as the song became popular, during Lizzy's career, that solo became regarded as Brian Robertson's solo. So it was a bit of an injustice to Gary. So I think this sort of evened up the books a bit by doing a version with Gary.
Because you've speeded up a bit as well, haven't you, on the new version? It's a little bit more up-tempo.
Yeah, we just tried to make it just a little more dance acceptable, as opposed to... I mean, the song is a nice ballad, but you can do... There's a way of doing slow songs. You can either do them... You see, I think, like, for example, say this guy Billy Ocean at the moment, I think it's a perfect example. It's only out of a casual interest as a songwriter do you notice things like this. But, like, Billy Ocean did a heavy sort of song, well, heavy-ish with a heavy guitar and stuff like that. So I was interested to see if he was into that cross between heavy and dance music. And then he came out with a ballad called Suddenly or something, But to me that really plods because it's not in a tempo. Whereas if it had been in a tempo, it would actually help the song. For example, a song Thin Lizzy did called Sarah, right? I wrote that, and when I wrote it, it was a ballad. Now, if it hadn't have been put into a dance tempo, it really would have been very over-the-top sentimental. Yeah. Sometimes, if I'm writing on the piano, for example, and I can't play the piano, I can just I know the basics, and all the chords sound different, so you could play 3 chords on the piano, which you'd know on the guitar, and you couldn't get a song out of, but because it's a different instrument, a different sound, it gives you you hear different harmonics, and therefore you draw a sort of different melody. Or if I wrote on the bass, or on a 6-string guitar, they're the 3 main things I write on. So if I wrote on the bass, say, for example, it's not a riffy song would come, say something like Dance in the Moonlight or Thunder and Lightning, I'd write sort of riffs like that, and it'd be sort of a groove.
Was there anything you missed after the split of Lizzie a couple of years earlier?
Oh, lots of things. I mean, Lizzie is like a girlfriend that you were madly in love with at one stage, but you can't go back to, So it's not often I'm in love with the idea of being in love with her, like seeing her again and being with her again, but actually knowing it's impossible. You can't really go back.
Because it seemed to go, I don't know, when you were with Snowy White, it seemed to sort of drop off a little bit, and then with John Sykes seemed to inject that adrenaline straight away. Did you ever regret sort of saying, well, that's it, that's the end of Lizzie?
Yeah, obviously, but and Sykes did inject an awful lot of a thing, but by that time, I'd say there was only me, Sykes, and maybe Downey was interested in really